Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening to the podcast. Appreciate you for taking your time out and listening. And because of that, you helped us become one of the top ranked podcasts according to Listen Notes, the podcast search engine. So really appreciate you for doing that. All right. So today we're talking with Jeannie Gainsburg. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jeannie. Jeannie is an award-winning educational trainer and consultant in the field of LGBTQ plus inclusion and effective allyship. She's the founder of Savvy Ally Action, Savvy Ally Action, and author of the book, The Savvy Ally, a guide for becoming a skilled LGBTQ plus advocate. Jeannie has a BA in psychology and an MA in social work, and she received the distinction from the New York State Assembly to be a distinguished educational and human rights service person. So she has done wonderful and great things, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about her work in promoting LGBTQ plus rights and inclusion. Welcome, Jeannie Gainsburg.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm very pleased to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. All right, so let's just jump right in. All right, so now I kind of read your bio and just kind of did what I could with that, but you tell us in your own words about really what it is that you do. And if you want to say more about who you are, both are welcome.
Okay, great. So let me just start by saying, please refer to me as Jeannie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Why did I share that? That's what I write about in my book. And if you're interested in learning more about why I shared that, please ask me. But yeah, my work is in LGBTQ plus inclusion and effective allyship. I am an ally to the community, so I'm not part of the LGBTQ plus communities myself. But I've been involved in this work for over 20 years. I was inspired by a book that I was reading. My husband had given it to me for my 40th birthday, and it was a book about the women who fought for my right to vote in the US. And I was doing this thing that I do when I tend to read history, which is like putting myself back in that time period and thinking like, how would I have behaved? And, would I have known this was instinctively right and wrong? I do this all the time. I see you're nodding as well. You may do this too. And I had convinced myself that I would be marching all alongside these amazing women who had fought for my right to vote. And it suddenly hit me that I was being really hypocritical because I have felt strongly about LGBTQ plus inclusion my whole life, and I hadn't done anything about it, like nothing. So I was so sort of struck by this thought that the next morning it was still with me, and I looked up our local center. I'm here in Rochester, New York, upstate New York. And I found our local LGBTQ plus center, and I called. I didn't even know what at the time we were using the initialism GLBT, and I didn't even know what that stood for. Like, that's where I was starting from, was like, I know nothing. I had no connection to the communities. I wasn't even sure they were going to welcome me as a volunteer, but they did welcome me as a volunteer. I volunteered there for 2 years. They ended up hiring me after those 2 years to be part of their staff. And then I eventually became the education director. I stayed on with that agency for 15 years. I learned so much. I met the most amazing people. And by the time I left that position, I was like, I have such amazing stuff in my head about, like, I know so much about how to be an ally to the LGBTQ plus communities that I need to get that out there into the world. And so the book that I wrote, The Savvy Ally, is truly a guidebook. It's the guidebook that I wanted when I first started, because I knew nothing. I'm like, tell me what to say, what not to say. Tell me what all these words mean. I don't understand any of this. And truly, most of the people who I work with, who make up the participants in my workshop, are these just big-hearted people who want to do the right thing, and they're just scared to death. They can't keep up with the language or the culture, and they're so afraid they're going to make a mistake or accidentally use an outdated word and offend someone. And so my book is really for them. It's just a guidebook on sort of everything you need to know about being an ally to the LGBTQ plus communities.
I mean, that's amazing. That's an amazing story that you acted immediately when that came to you. You're like, I'm going to just jump right in and do this.
Yeah, immediately after 40 years. I mean, really, I spent 40 years doing nothing. So, like, let's be honest about this. But yes,
but the
after
moment,
I had that moment.
yeah, that's what I mean. Because sometimes we have moments and then it still takes a while. Like for me, this podcast, I had the moment, but then it took 2 years.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
to start the
sure.
podcast. So that's why I acknowledge that. It is amazing.
Thank you.
And it sounds like it was a good fit for you. Like
Oh, it was
when you
an
got in there.
amazing,
Yeah.
amazing fit. And the people that I met were just so incredibly kind and welcoming and forgiving of my mistakes. You know, that's another thing I write about a lot in my book is that being an ally is an ongoing journey of making mistakes. You know, there's no such thing as the perfect ally. We have to get comfortable with making mistakes and knowing how to recover from that and figuring out how to get it right the next time. And the people that I worked with were so great about that. They really just assumed goodwill with me, assumed I was coming from a good place when I messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they could sense that you were coming from a good place, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's something that I'm sure now that you've been in this and been doing this work for a while, there's something that there's probably some questions that people have. What's like one or two of the main questions that people who really don't have any experience with allyship or don't have any knowledge or very little knowledge? What's
hmm
two of the most common questions people ask about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely get the question a lot of, I don't really understand, sure, I'm fine with gay people or I'm fine with LGBTQ plus people, but like what does this have to do with work? Like that doesn't, why do like keep that at home? That doesn't have to do with work. That kind of comment I hear often. Or like, just keep that out of schools. We don't need our sexual orientation doesn't need to come to school with us, for example. Like those types of comments are very common. And one of the things that I like to let people know or understand is that our orientation, like who we are as far as, being LGBTQ plus or straight or, cisgender, which means not transgender, whatever we are, it comes with us everywhere. We can't leave it at home. I mean, to say to like a lesbian, for example, being a lesbian has nothing to do with work. Can you just leave that part of yourself at home today? She cannot do that. It's impossible. All she can do is hide that about herself if she feels unsafe or not welcome. She's still a lesbian at work, even if she changes the pronouns when she talks about her wife, right? If she has to sort of lie and say, "Oh yeah, my husband and he," right? She's still a lesbian at work. You haven't changed that. Her orientation still comes to work. All you've done is created an environment where she can't bring her authentic self to work. And what that looks like for most of us, bringing our authentic self to work, those of us who are straight and cisgender, it means putting a picture on your desk of you and your partner, right? Or bringing your husband or wife to the office party. Like this is what it means to be out at work. I think that's the other myth is that people tend to confuse orientation with behaviors. Like sexual behaviors don't come to work for any of us. That would be inappropriate. But our orientation is with us at all times. And that should be something. It's very much related to work. If we have to hide that about ourselves, it actually affects our ability to be productive, our ability to connect with our coworkers. There's so much evidence that creating environments where everyone can be authentic at work is good for business. So that's one of the things that I like to let people know about, that, being your orientation absolutely does have something to do with work. Another big one I think is pronouns. And I started off by sharing my pronouns. Now this is, I believe people won't be able to see the video of this, so you won't be able to see me, but I'm a person who moves through the world. I identify as a woman. People assume my pronouns are she and her. They never get it wrong. So some people might think that's reason enough for me not to share my pronouns. I'm sharing something that's obvious, right? Why on earth would I do that? And there's several reasons why I do it. One of the main reasons is that it helps to normalize the behavior. So making it so much easier and safer for other people who really have to share their pronouns because they're not obvious. So if you can imagine, like, let's say you're at a conference and, everybody checks in and you get your name tags, and the only people walking around the conference with, a pronoun pin or a pronoun ribbon are people whose pronouns aren't obvious. That's incredibly othering, right? It's like those odd people over there who are wearing pronouns on their shirts. Every time an ally grabs one of those pronoun pins and puts it on their shirts to display their pronouns, they're helping to create a culture where this just becomes the norm, which makes it so much easier for those folks who really have to share their pronouns in order for people to get them right. Um, So it's one of the things that I like to do to help support the LGBTQ plus communities. It also shows that I support the LGBTQ plus communities. In a way, it's kind of like letting people know that I'm an ally. So I think that that culture of offering our pronouns is really important. I definitely want to just share that I think sharing pronouns or offering the opportunity, it should always be optional. I don't want anyone to think I'm saying that this is a mandatory thing. Every employee has to share their pronouns. No, I don't think so. I think it should be optional, but I think it's a great option and it's a great ally action.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful action that we could do for those who are interested, that
Hmm.
we could do immediately
Yeah.
and pretty easily.
Yeah.
Like even now on our Zoom names, right? I could easily add my
Yes.
nouns there, and
I, yep.
that's a form of allyship right there.
I love it when I'm doing like a book talk and on Zoom and I just see like a sea of faces with names and pronouns. I'm like, I'm gonna nail it every time. Every single person here is telling me how to refer to them correctly, right? Like
Yeah,
we'll never get it wrong if people share that.
yeah,
So it's very much like I think about it like titles. If you look at me, you don't know whether I'm a Mrs. or a Miss or a Ms. or a doctor or like you don't know. Oftentimes we're guessing, unless I let you know that. And of course, that's very similar to pronouns. It's really just about making sure we're referring to people appropriately.
yeah. That's a great action that we can do. Now, I'm guessing based on what you've said so far, but tell us what the main idea, the premise of the book is.
So, as I mentioned, it's a guidebook. It is not for people who kind of want to be convinced that LGBTQ plus inclusion is the right thing to do. I think there's a lot of good books out there for people who want to know more about whether, they want to become an ally. This book, if you pick it up, I'm assuming that you want to be an ally. You probably already are an ally and you're doing great ally things. And you want to know how to do more, right? How to be better. So it's really for people who are already on board with LGBTQ plus inclusion and really just want those tools. It's very action oriented. I just do a lot around like, here are things you can do. I talk a lot about respectful communication. I do not give you a list of an enormous glossary of terms to memorize. I think that's actually a terrible ally action. So if you're worried, if you're listening in today and you're worried that you can't be an ally because you don't know what, pansexual means or genderqueer or like some of these words, you can absolutely be an ally. I offer respectful communication tips that will help you navigate conversations, whether you know someone's identity or not. And truly, most of the time, we don't. I think people get very intimidated by all of the terms, and we just don't need to know all those to just do some great ally things. I talk about creating inclusive places at work and in your schools. And how to have conversations with people who think differently than you do in a way that opens up their ears to conversations rather than shutting them down. I talk about how to mess up, um, all sorts of good things. And I try and keep it pretty light. I should say that too. My book is not like a heavy academic slog. It's very, very approachable. It's very forgiving. And I think it's a fun read. I've heard feedback that it's a fun read. So it's not something that you're going to be slogging through, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. So what I know when you talked about the experience when you had your initial moment of jumping in and becoming an
Mhm.
ally in a real way and volunteering and moving up, so to speak, and how much you expressed it. What was the point? At what point did you say I need to put this in a book and
Mm.
that decision to?
It was very late. So I worked 15 years for this agency here in Rochester. The agency eventually shut down under not so great circumstances. It was a horrible end to a wonderful, one of the oldest actually LGBT centers in the nation. And I found myself just on my own, like floundering and not knowing what to do. And so I went a few months just not knowing what to do with all this information in my head, knowing that when I had left previous jobs that I wasn't able to retain the information. Great information that I had in my head just disappeared so quickly when you don't use it. So before I even had the idea of writing a book, I realized I've got to write this down. It was more for me, it was my notes. So I started madly taking notes about all this amazing stuff that I had learned, and because I was worried I was going to forget it. And at some point it just clicked. I was like, wait a minute. Why am I just keeping this on my Word doc on my computer? Like, get this out into the world. So the next thing I did was I looked to see what was out there in the world, what other books were out there, because writing a book was never on my radar, and I had no intention of reinventing the wheel. I'm like, if this book exists, I don't need to write it. But it really didn't. The book that I had envisioned, the one that I wrote, was really not out there. Most of the books that I found about how to be an ally ended up being like 70 to 80% why to be an ally, with sort of some action pieces at the end. And I knew I wanted mine to just be 100% action, like here's how to do it guidebook. So when I realized that book didn't exist, I just started writing it, and it actually flowed out of me very quickly, because a lot of it was stuff I had already taken notes on, and I really just had some fun with it. I mean, I added like fun pop quiz and funny side notes and things like that to hopefully, I think I'm funny. Hopefully other people do too. Yeah, so I wrote it very, very quickly. And then I, ended up finding a publisher. I found Roman and Littlefield was very interested in it. And it was published, well, it was published March 12th, 2020, if you can imagine that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like worst date ever to publish your first book. I mean, it was
Oh,
awful. Like book launch canceled, like everything canceled, everything came to a screeching halt. Teachers, who make up a huge part of my audience in my workshops, they had other things to do at that point in March 2020. They were all learning how to Zoom, right? Like, what the heck? LGBTQ plus inclusion in the classroom was not high on their list at that point. So it was a slow start, a very frustrating start, but eventually the book ended up gaining traction. It did great. I mean, really did great on Amazon, wonderful reviews. And my publisher was so thrilled he wanted a second edition. So the second edition of my book just came out this past April. And it's it's updated, it's revised. There's 4 brand new chapters. Very excited about the newest edition. So if you're listening today and you're interested, do make sure that you get the second edition. It's much more updated.
well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
And so now that we're talking about your book and you're talking a bit about your author hat, let's stay there for a moment.
Okay.
All right. So as an author, you kind of helped us see how that came and how the book came to you and through you, and how the publisher has momentum around it.
Yeah.
What has been a positive way that has helped you get it back now that the schools are back into somewhat of now a normal routine? What basically I'm asking about getting readers or responders to the book as an author, right? Because there are probably some authors listening, and it's always this notion of getting the book in front of readers. Yes. What has worked well for you to get your book in front of readers?
I have to say it's probably my biggest challenge. I'm sure you hear this all the time. I somehow, in my ignorance, I assumed that once, an actual publishing company was interested in my book, woohoo, I had made it, done. I really had no idea how little, especially the smaller publishing companies do as far as publicity. So, they did a great job of putting my book in their catalog, which went out to, a lot of different places, colleges and libraries and places like that. But they really did like almost nothing when it came to publicity. That really fell on me, and I didn't know that. So for my first book, I kind of just did my own publicity, which was not great. And I'd say the biggest way that word got out about my book was through my workshops. So I do tons of workshops. So last year I did 100 workshops, just to give you an idea. In 2023, I did 100 workshops. And I had already built a pretty good, email list and client group from my previous work at the center. So fortunately, these weren't like cold calls. Like, people knew me, they liked my work, they were excited I'd written a book. So a lot of that just moved smoothly into workshops out on my own through my company, Savvy Ally Action. And I think that's probably the biggest way. Like, corporations would find my book and then want me to come in and do workshops, and then that led to more people buying the book. So the workshops, I think, were the biggest piece. They'd sit through an hour workshop, and they if they liked my style and my content, they'd go pick up my book, which was great. Second time around, I actually put some of the money, and I didn't make, no one makes a ton of money unless you're J.K. Rowling on books, but
right.
I put some of the money that I made from the first edition into the second edition for publicity. So for the second time around, for my second edition, I did hire a publicist, because I didn't even know to do that. I didn't even know what a publicist was when I started. So
Yeah.
I was really starting ignorant. Did you not know either?
Yeah, I mean, like anything new, if you haven't done it, you don't know.
Right.
Right. So yeah.
So second time around, I hired a publicist, and she did a great job of getting me on, some radio shows and podcasts, getting me a couple great endorsements, and I'm sure that all helped.
Yeah.
So,
That's a fascinating. You did 100 workshops in a year. That's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, it's a
That's
lot.
incredible. Were they in educational environments, mostly corporate, or like what was the audience like?
Yeah, I'd say probably half, almost half of my workshops are for public school districts. Schools really, are doing some great work around inclusion, and um, I'd say maybe a third are pretty big corporations, and then the rest are, faith communities, agencies, nonprofits, just an assortment of folks.
That sounds wonderful. Good for
Yeah.
you. That's
Thanks.
a major accomplishment. Major
Thank you.
accomplishment. All right, so we know that how you started to the idea to move into this work. But now let's go back to little Jeannie. Can you imagine, is there any part of little Jeannie when you were a little girl that is now reflected in the work you do? Were there ways you were an ally in some other way, or were you
Mm.
that person? Or is there anything reflected in what you're doing now, either in the book or the general work as a savvy ally? Does it show up
It's
anywhere in little Jeannie?
It's an interesting question. I've thought back about what I knew and what I thought. I'm going to stay on LGBTQ plus people. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different things that, I was sort of thinking about, race, disability. Again, I'm constantly learning about all of these different communities and how to be allies to them. But since, my book is about the LGBTQ plus communities, I'll kind of stick on that. I didn't grow up knowing anyone who identified was out, I should say, as gay or lesbian. Transgender, didn't even know the word, didn't even know transgender people existed. So I was born in 63. I don't think the word transgender, if it did exist, it wasn't in sort of common vernacular. But I didn't grow up with any gay or lesbian people who were out. So I graduated from a big public high school in New Jersey in 1981, graduated in class of like 600. There wasn't a single out LGBTQ plus person. Later, I would learn that I had tons of gay and lesbian friends who you just couldn't be out. They didn't feel safe, back in that time period. So interestingly, I despite that, I really was pretty liberal in my attitudes towards gays and lesbians. I found a note that I was passing in seventh grade science class instead of paying attention to the teacher. My best friend and I were passing a note that I found years later in my desk, and she was basically just saying gay people are sick and they should be locked up, or like just saying horrible things about them. And I was writing back like, what is your problem? Live and let live. And it actually really surprised me. I mean, certainly would not have called myself an ally because I wasn't doing anything active, but just that I had that attitude of like, what's your problem? This is I don't understand why you've got your panties in a bunch over this. So I was really pleased to see that. And I think I mostly just have to credit my parents. I grew up in a very liberal household. The word gay was not a naughty word. It was just a word like any other word, which is, how it should be, just treated as a normal word. So I think coming from that background, I didn't understand why people were so discriminatory against, gays and lesbians at the time. So, I mean, I guess that's probably where it started, but I certainly didn't know anyone in the communities until I went, in college. I started finally meeting some out LGBTQ plus people.
Yes,
So
yeah. I mean, that's amazing that you were able to find the note and that you had
yeah.
access to
Oh
that,
my
right? To that
gosh.
memory.
Kind of
I mean,
embarrassing that I saved that all those years.
no, I think that's amazing. I would love to find something like that. It's such a
Yeah.
indicator. And it's even though you're saying you didn't know anybody in the community, the LGBTQ plus community, you were a person who thought about other people. I think that's
Yes.
the part that carries over because a lot of times we only think about the people who are like us. And
Mhm.
you had some respect and some regard for people who are not like you. And it sounds to me that's the thing that's carried over. You
I think
talk
that's
about
true. Yeah,
just
even though I wish I had been a little more active thinking back, on just I was a very shy kid, so I wasn't the kid that was going to speak up, but I wish I had. I wish I had spoken up more for the kids that were being picked on and bullied.
yeah,
I think we have a lot more awareness now around bullying and kindness and things like that. They were not being taught.
right.
In fact, our teacher, we had a few teachers who were more homophobic than anyone I've ever met. Would outwardly tease the children that they thought were gay.
Wow.
In the 70s, this was
Wow.
just the norm. Yeah, like this was the background. Like what?
And
Yeah.
you still
So
came out with a heart for others. So good for you in
thank
the
you.
midst of that environment. All right. So now let's talk about the podcast, which the intent of the well, maybe you don't, maybe do, maybe don't, I don't know. The intent of the podcast. Remember, I said to you, you took action right away.
Mhm.
I had one of those moments to create the podcast, but it took 2 years because I kept saying, I don't want to put myself out there. It just was all fear, right? But I was making excuses that were plausible, possibly. And so then when I finally did it, I thought, who is the podcast for? And I knew right away. It's for women that I'm now calling high achieving women, for women who are professional, ambitious, goal oriented, doing lots of things, and good at a couple of things. And so people come to them, whether at work or at home, people come to them for questions. Could be related to what they do or not, but they're the ones that people kind of come to for questions. And so they're supporting others. And because they're supporting others, it seems to those other people that they don't need any support. So I thought, well, who supports them?
Mm.
I will get together and we can all talk to each other and we'll have a moment of support in the podcast. And so that's why I started the podcast. And when I was in high school, I had a secret fantasy of being on the radio.
Oh, look at you. That's amazing.
And I never told anybody until after I started the podcast because not that I was hiding it just was not even a reality. Like, what is that? I didn't know it could be a job or anything related to it. It was just something that was out there. That was a fantasy. And then when podcasts became more popular, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I always wanted to be on the radio. So this is my version
That's great.
of being on the radio. And I get to support what I call high achieving women.
Yeah,
All right.
that's
So
really
now
cool.
with that in mind, this is the part where we come to support the high achieving women. So if there's a woman that I described that's listening, what's something you can share from either your personal experience in life or your professional experience that could support them in any way, whether they're an author and it's in their professional life or just being the kind of woman that I described, ambitious, goal-oriented, and all of that. What's something you can share
Hmm.
with them?
Mm. Well, I think on a personal level, I can't remember the quote or the person who said it. I'm such a great interviewer, aren't I? Um, someone said something about like, you know, the biggest or the biggest stumbling block to creativity is you. It's something like that. Like, but I find this so true for myself. Like I've got this voice in my head that's like, you can't do that. You're going to be terrible at that. Where is this coming from? I mean, I'm surrounded by really great, supportive people who would never say such horrible things to me. It's coming from me, and so I need to check that. And I think, especially as women, we're more likely to do that. We have this imposter syndrome, and we're not good enough. And of course, that's very cultural. But I think on a personal level, I would encourage people to think about, do you have that little voice? Are you holding you back? Because I think sometimes we're doing that and we don't even realize it. Get out of your own way, basically, if you possibly can. Switch that around to some positive language, like, of course I can do this, and or even think about like where is that negativity coming from? On a more sort of professional level, the thing that really helped me, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier before the interview officially started, was if you can find yourself a group of authors. Like I'm involved in a group of women authors, and that has just been incredible for me, someone who knew not the first thing about writing a book or publishing a book. That group has just been amazing, and I'm involved in a group that is all women, and just being able to not just it's mostly done by email, but you're seeing threads of conversations that are going on, but you also can go back in this one and investigate, like, well, has anyone talked about this? And over the years you can find this great information of like, if you can come up with a question, someone else has probably already asked it and the conversation may have already happened. So if you can connect yourself to a group of like-minded women or other authors, that would be a great thing to do.
Yes, yes. And I find those words helpful, and I feel like they'll be helpful for others who are listening. Okay, so now the podcast is Leadership Purpose. So purpose is one of my favorite topics to talk about, to think about, to do. I found purpose, and I just, make all my decisions that keep me in alignment with my purpose. And so I love to help others do that. So now, but for you, do you think it's important for you or in general for people to have a sense of purpose in their work? And if so, why? If not, why not?
I would say 100% yes. I've been reading up on successful retirement recently. I just read a book and it got me interested in retiring and folks who do that successfully. And one of the main things that I keep reading in successful retirement is that, or even just like longevity of life, is having a purpose. Like go and read stuff about like, the people who live, until they're 100, yeah, okay, nutrition and sleep, great, exercise, but like this sense that you're doing something worthwhile, that you're leaving the world a better place, that you have a purpose for being on this earth, just as important as good nutrition and exercise. You can see that anywhere. So absolutely, it's something I think about. It's something I think about again in retirement. Do I want to find some volunteer work where I can still feel like I'm doing something? And yeah, for me, I mean, I think with this work around LGBTQ plus inclusion, I just feel like, when I'm when I'm on my deathbed, if I have the opportunity to think about this, like I want to leave knowing that I made the world a better place. Like I did things to actually improve the world, not keep it the way it was, or even worse, make it worse, but do something that actually helped people. I think that is really so important for personal growth, and also just for that longevity and that reason for being here.
Yes. And it sounds like you have that sense of purpose for yourself now. Is that correct or no?
Yes. Oh, very
Yeah.
much. My work definitely has that
Yeah.
big bonus.
Yeah. And you talked about helping, make the world a better place. Do you think that's an important piece of the part that gives you this sense of purpose, or is it something else?
Yes, no, I think that's it. And I think, I mean, probably the biggest thing that brings me joy around the idea of purpose and leaving the world a better place is just getting emails from people who like I don't even know, people I don't even know, who are like, I just read your book, it changed my life. This kind of thing is like, and I swear the timing's incredible. It's always when I'm at my lowest, like I'm just like, oh, I shouldn't do this work anymore for whatever reason. I'm down in the dumps, or some new horrible thing has happened on the news and I'm just so low. And I'll get one of these emails and it's just like, yeah, this is it. This is why I keep doing this, and I'm so grateful to those people who take 10 minutes to write those emails and let me know like the impact that my book had on them or on their family. Just incredible. And it's such a bonus to doing this kind of work to get that. I don't think a lot of people in their work necessarily get that kind of feedback. And it's just amazing, and it keeps me going and it keeps me energized.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, Jeannie, you have shared so much of your wisdom and your time. Before we tell people where they can be in touch with you, is there anything that I maybe didn't ask that came to your mind, or something that popped up, or one last word? You don't have to, but if there's something, I want to give you a moment for that now.
Hmm. I guess it's just, I mean, I sort of mentioned it before, but I just want to say, like, jump in there, folks. Like, if you are one of these big-hearted people I'm talking about, who's just afraid, just afraid they're going to say something, they're going to mess up. Like, you probably will. You're probably going to mess up. We all do. That should not hold you back. Like, we should be having conversations. We should be curious. We should learn and make mistakes and recover and grow. And that's the key to allyship. So, don't sit back thinking you've got to study up before you can get out there and do, any ally actions. It'll show if you're coming from a place, of warmth and an interest in supporting people. That will show. And just dive right in.
That's great.
Read my
Well,
book first, then dive right in.
yeah. So speaking of your book, how can people be in touch with you if they want to hear more about you and your book? And we'll be sure to put these in the show notes, but why don't you tell us now where people can be in touch with you?
Sure. Probably the best place is my website, which is savvyallyaction.com. And on that on my website, you'll find links to my book if you're interested in the book. You will find a lot of free videos. I create a video every month, little 2-minute videos with little ally tips, things you can do or updates on language. So if you actually subscribe to my website, you'll get those emails every month. It's the only thing I ever send out, folks. That's my promise to you. I don't send a bunch of junk. I don't sell my emails, your emails. You will get my video, and that is it. But they're really cute. They're just 2 minutes long, and they'll give you some ally tips every month, which will keep you kind of up to date. You'll also find free handouts on my website, and all sorts of goodies. Oh, and information on my workshops if you'd like to hire me to come in and do a workshop for you in your workplace or your school.
That sounds wonderful. Jeannie, thank you for your time today and your generosity and for doing this important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Really, really glad to know that you're doing that.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. This was great.
Wonderful. Okay, everyone. And if you want to hear more from me, you can reach me on social media, all the social media channels at Robin L. Owens, PhD, Robin L. Owens, PhD. And the podcast has a website. I'd love for you to come on over to the website and check out what we have going on. We have resources and information, not just about the podcast, but for you. And the podcast website is Leadership Purpose Podcast. It's no surprise there. LeadershipPurposePodcast.com. LeadershipPurposePodcast.com. And I hope to see you there. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.